Hi, fourth graders. Thanks for joining me today for math. Today, we'll begin a new unit that's all about exploring math patterns and math rules. For the next couple of days, we will be working with something called the penny jar. We will be using the penny jar to represent and model given situations. We'll use our representations and models to help us figure out any patterns and any rules we could use to write and solve equations. If you want to try this at home, you'll need some form of container or jar and some counters like pennies or marbles or bingo chips, or you can even use some pieces of cereal. All right, here we go. Let's talk about penny jars. In penny jar problems, you have a jar containing some pennies. Then you put in a certain number of pennies into the jar again and again. We call these rounds. We will use this information to try to figure out how many pennies are in the jar after several rounds. Here's my jar, and I'm going to start by putting 4 pennies into it. Now I'm going to put 6 pennies into the jar each round. That's round 1. There's 6 pennies I added to the jar. How many pennies do I have now? If you said 10 pennies, you're right. All right, so now I'm going to keep adding 6 pennies to the jar for a total of 7 rounds. That's round 4, round 5, round 6, and round 7. So how many pennies do I have in the jar now? Let's see if we can use a representation to help us. Here, take a look at my representation that I drew. And you can see that here's my penny jar. And I started with the 4 pennies. And after round 1, I added 6 pennies. After round 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds. And I wrote an equation to help me figure out the number of pennies after all of the rounds were finished. So I start with 4 and I add 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 7 times. Or I could write 4 plus 7 groups. I added 6 pennies 7 times. So 7 groups of 6 will tell us the number of pennies. All right, I have another video that I can share with you to help you in a different penny jar situation. So here we go.
The penny jar. A penny jar starts with a certain number of pennies already in it. This penny jar starts with 4 pennies in it. Then, the same number of pennies are added each round. For this penny jar, 6 pennies are added each round. The penny jar problems include different penny jar situations. Here is the penny jar situation I am working on. Start with 3 pennies. Add 5 pennies each round. There are already 3 pennies in the jar. In round 1, 5 pennies are added. After round 1, there are 8 pennies in the jar. In round 2, 5 more pennies are added. Now there are 13 pennies in the jar. How many pennies will there be in the jar after the 4th round? I drew a picture to find out. There are 3 pennies already in the jar. Then the same amount, 5 pennies, is added in each round. After round 4, 5 pennies will have been added 4 times. There were 4 rounds with 5 pennies added per round. So I multiplied 4 times 5, which is 20 pennies. Then I added the 3 pennies I started with. After round 4, the jar will have 23 pennies.
Okay, so your job today is to use the penny jar cards on the next slide and choose how many pennies you're going to start with and how many pennies you'll add each round. Then you're going to create your own representation and your own equation to clearly explain your penny jar situation. You don't have to use the same representation and model that I've used, and you don't have to use the same type of equation that I've used. Okay, off you go. I'll see you during office hours today at 10:30.